You baby boomers, you guys had it so stinking easy. I mean, everything was cheaper. Food was cheaper, cars were cheaper. I mean, gas, did you guys even have to pay for gas? Not only that, you had a pension. You'd go to work, you'd put in your normal hours, and then you were out in 20 years, and you guys would just be retired. And all you did is leave us with a broken system. You know, you entitled millennials, you think everything should just be handed to you. We fought for everything we got. We walked uphill both ways to the grocery store and to school. We built the foundations of this great country, and you're tearing it apart. Oh my God, shut up, you guys. We grew up in a time of global uncertainty. Every day we feared about getting nuked. Not only that, we had to work hard for things. Things weren't just handed to us. I remember just being in a constant state of recession growing up. You know what? If there's one thing we had the best styles, we had MTV, and we rode our BMX bikes outside every day, but we didn't walk uphill both ways like that guy.
No cap, man. Y'all need to get right.
So who's the real victim? From baby boomers to the Gen Alphas, we're gonna take a look at the economic woes, how each one of them impacted each generation, right up to the present day. I'm a Gen Xer. During my time, things were very different. We played outside, we had MTV, we went through multiple recessions, and I'll never forget Mom and even Dad always saying, "Shut the door, we're not heating the outside." That's just a representation of what things were like. We didn't have extra money to just go do things, but we made the best of everything. I'm not saying my generation is one of the best, but it's the one that I remember. And you know what? It's the one that made me who I am. What was it like for other generations? Let's start with the baby boomers. 1946 to 1964. What was it like for them? They had economic prosperity. It was post-World War II. Industry was booming, which meant there were lots of jobs. Jobs were plentiful. Therefore, people's standard of living was going up. Family sizes were smaller, usually about 1 to 2 children. So therefore, the cost and the relationship with the children was increased, which provided the boomers and their families with better economic conditions and more outlook and more positivity. Nixon took us off the gold standard during this period of time. That was an interesting thing because people didn't know what that meant. Everything prior was based on gold. The dollar had a valuation based on the amount of gold, and all of a sudden that was gone. There was a lot of technological advances. TVs were becoming a mainstream. Space exploration was starting to happen, and there was a lot of advances in that. You might not know this, but this was the civil rights movement. You probably know this, but the civil rights movement was at its peak. It was really the start of cultural revolution. Rock and roll was born. People started going to college, and they were all about creating their future vision, not the future of their parents. They wanted to be their own. It was all about creative expression. There was a lot of educational opportunities from higher education to colleges, and colleges were booming. Let's look at the stats of this particular generation. The median household income was about $71,000. The family size was anywhere between 1 to 2 children. The average household savings was about $152,000. This one caught my attention. The average household debt was only about $52,000. The next generation is Gen X, 1965 to 1980. This is my generation, and my generation was filled with economic uncertainty. There was so many changes. There was uproars, there was recessionary periods. We even had the oil crisis. This is the first recession I ever went through. I owned my skateboard, snowboard shops right when the dot-com crash happened. And I'll never forget the dot-com bubble burst. It was right when all of us were entering the labor force, or we were starting our businesses. I had my skateboard, snowboard shops. And this was a really hard time because this was the very first recession I ever went through. That economic uncertainty we'd never felt. We didn't even know what it really meant, but what we did know is a lot of people lost their jobs. They had to find new jobs, which there wasn't a lot of jobs at that time, which severely impacted our financial well-being. And then there was all the technological advances. This was the emergence of the digital age. I mean, the digital age back then was like a Commodore 64. We didn't have cell phones yet, but it still changed the whole environment. Computers started taking over what people used to do. People found themselves displaced. They had to up their education. They had to find out and learn new skills. And all of that really led to the Gen X entering the college world. We had to go to college in order to even get a job, or so we were told. And all of this displacement led to the pursuit of higher education. And you know what that led to? Higher student loan debts. So my generation is probably one of the first that had the real burden of college debt. Because after we came out of college, we had to enter a very difficult labor market, which didn't pay a whole lot. So we had these big college loan payments, not like you see today where everything's subsidized. Back then, we just had to make the payments. And it was very difficult for a lot of the people that came out of college, getting into their profession, starting at the bottom. They had a hard time having a family, paying for a house, and actually keeping up with the college loan debts. And this severely impacted our ability to save and our ability to actually accumulate wealth. And I remember this one vividly. It was a changing workforce dynamic. During my time, there was a lot of shift in the workforce. Unlike my parents, who were baby boomers, they held a job and worked there until they retired. My generation changed jobs often. We would get into one job and try to level up and get into another job and constantly play that game of this offer was better than this one, so we would make that shift, which really resulted in a loss of loyalty. Growing up, I don't remember having a lot of loyalty for the few jobs that I did work. They were really just a stepping stone to get me where I wanted to be. And my generation maybe wasn't the first, but I certainly remember witnessing globalization at its finest. I remember my parents drove American-made vehicles. My generation, we saw fuel-efficient Japanese cars coming in. And I remember the ads of showing planes dropping cars. I just remember it was like it was yesterday, cars and computers and everything being dropped out of planes. This was globalization. And I remember seeing how that changed everything. It brought the price of everything down, but it also kept the labor market and kept the pay rates down because it was really just fighting to keep up with globalization. Back then, I didn't realize that that's the reason for it, but I do today. We needed to have a lot of flexibility in our career paths. Look at mine. I was all over the place. From self-employed to working at restaurants to putting roofs on in the summer to landscaping to then finding my way to Wall Street. It was an interesting path. Let's look at the stats of my generation. Household size was about 1 to 2 children. Average household income was about $102,000. But our household debt went up, about $61,000. By today's measure, that's pretty low, but back then that was higher than it was for the previous generation. And this one, I can tell you, was absolutely true. And my generation wasn't really a generation of saving. Therefore, the household savings was only about $68,000. Now, I was taught by my mom to save, but most of the people that I knew and my friends, they didn't know a thing about saving. They made money and they spent money while they continued on their pursuit of hopping jobs and trying to find their way to a career. Well, that was the Gen X. As we move on, we land in the millennial generation, which is 1981 to 1996, although that's a bit disputed. The 2008 global crisis was one of the things that really shaped this generation from the start, and it probably made things really difficult, although many millennials don't really remember the impacts of the financial crisis, but their parents do. The 2008 global financial crisis had a profound effect on this generation and their ability to start their careers. Job opportunities were limited and unemployment rates were high. This generation, most of them worked multiple jobs just to make ends meet. Millennials were burdened with, well, you guessed it, high student loan debt, even more so than the Gen Xers. The economic challenges faced early on by this generation made it so that they had to delay some of their milestones. They had children later, and their careers, well, a lot of them didn't fall into their actual career path until later in life than prior generations. This generation was really burdened by debt and debt repayments. Many millennials had to really navigate a difficult work environment. They had to, like I said, have multiple jobs. Health insurance wasn't really a part of it because when you're working part-time jobs, you're not going to have access to benefits like health insurance, 401ks, and all the traditional employee benefits, which came much later from millennials. But this generation had major advancements in technology. From cell phones to laptops to iPads, everything was right there at their fingertips. They had access to information no other generation ever did, and boy, did they learn how to use it. So much so that they didn't spend as much time doing the things that prior generations did, like playing outside, and like my generation, riding BMXs and skateboarding. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but more time was spent in front of a screen, connecting, communicating, and just surviving. And the data points for this generation was about the same. Family size, about 1 to 2. The household income, about $84,000. The household debt was only about $48,000, but the household savings, less than $25,000. So you can sort of see what's happening here. As we go through just these generations, you're seeing major changes. Changes in the economic conditions, changes in the workforce conditions, changes, major changes in the technology and the technological advancements that have shaped the way that we live our lives. All of these things all came with debt and more debt, which meant more repayment of debts, which meant lower and lower savings rates, even though, for most cases, incomes have gone up. Moving on, we land in Gen Zs, 1996 to 2012. This generation had rising education costs, big student loan debts. The gig economy and freelance work became increasingly prevalent. Everybody thought they were going to be self-employed entrepreneurs. They're more likely to seek flexible work hours and a work-life balance. I call this the spoiled generation because they all think they're worth $1 million and they don't want to work for it. Call it what it is, but that's what I see being an employer. The work environment evolved a lot for this generation, and it set their expectations really high. Gen Z is considered the first truly digital native generation. Having grown up immersed completely in technology, their social media is how they connected, how they did business, and how they do everything. It's constant connectivity. Look around. Face down. This generation was also one of the most impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The data points for this generation are a bit wonky because it's such a young generation, so we don't really have employment statistics or family sizes, although it looks as though it might trend previous generations. You also notice that if we were to go to generations prior to baby boomers, the family sizes were much larger. And as we keep going generation to generation, the family sizes are either smaller or starting later, which is resulting in a lot of labor shortages. If the economy is going to keep growing, it has to grow by population, but we're really not. This generation's average income is about $47,000, and their average debt's about $16,000. The average savings for this generation, well, it's not really on the radar screen yet, but it'll be interesting to see where that lands. Because as I see it, this generation is not being taught to save money, just like the prior generation had a hard time with savings. I feel like savings as a way of life really started to die with my generation, Gen X. And this leads me to the final generation, Generation Alpha, 2012 to present day. My daughter, Vivi, is part of this generation. And I'm not saying this because I'm biased because I have a daughter in this generation, but this generation single-handedly is the most important generation ever. This generation and the way that they're brought up, the way that they're taught, the way that they are taught to view life and to value life is single-handedly going to be what either sinks this great nation or helps this great nation survive. Not to put it all on the back of this generation, but all prior generations have made a lot of mistakes, created a lot of debt, and it's all gonna land right here on their shoulders. Best of luck to you. But I'm not gonna just leave it there. How this generation handles the debt and all the problems in the political environment and the divide, it's not up to them to fix it. It's up to all of us. You see, I talk a lot about legacy. I talk about what is it like to leave a legacy. And when I ask people to define a legacy, a lot of times they say, oh, I've got life insurance that's gonna pass on. Oh, I've got money in the bank. They get the car, they get the house. Stop, stop. When we talk about a legacy, this is where it all lands. It's not what we leave behind in terms of material items. It's what we leave behind in terms of knowledge and ethics and what they value and how we teach them to value the things they have and the life that they're given. We need to teach this generation what we weren't taught. That's the hard part. All we know is what we grew up with. In prior generations, one after the other, that prior generation passed down their knowledge. And unfortunately, a lot of things were passed down that are not good. We have to break that right here. So when you start thinking about your generation, when you start thinking about what you have to do to get this next generation ready, you can't take that lightly. We need to teach this generation how money really works. And I'm not saying that because they need more money. I'm saying that because that is the tool that will help them live a better life and help them survive. Because this is the generation that is going to be the one that has to learn survival. Unfortunately, we've had it really easy in prior generations. But good times create weak people. Hard times create strong people. Hate to say it, this is the generation that's gonna know hard times. And it's gonna harden each and every single one of them. But are they gonna be able to handle that pressure? That's on us, that's on you. What are you doing to get your kids ready to be able to survive in a world that we don't know what it's gonna be, but it certainly isn't gonna be as rosy as the one we grew up with? And what are you willing to sacrifice to make sure that your children will be ready? Or are you just gonna sit back and just pretend this doesn't have anything to do with you, it's not your problem, you didn't create the problem, and blame it on somebody else? I want you to look in the mirror and I want you to take a really deep, hard look, because you and I created the problem. So you and I are tasked with the responsibility to get this generation ready so that they will survive and they will thrive. That isn't on them, it's on us. Every one of these generations has seen the economic highs and they've seen the economic lows. But each one of these generations is very quick to point the finger and blame the previous generation for their problems. Recessions, bubbles, wars, inflation. Each generation has experienced what we call short-term debt cycles, which I just mentioned, and what Ray Dalio teaches in his books and his videos. But what none of the prior generations have ever seen is the end of the long-term debt cycle, which is upon us now. We really haven't seen how hard it can get because we've never seen the impact. You would have had to have lived through the Great Depression to understand even this much of what we're about to embark on. Are you ready? Have you even started to think about planning? Have you started planning? These are important questions you need to be asking yourself, because it's really easy to bury your head in the sand, but that's not what you need to do. What would be a lot better is if you actually rise up, be the light in the darkness to lead those that need help through what we're about to encounter. Because for the first time in some of your lives, it's not about you, it's about them. It's about everybody else. It's about solving other people's problems, starting with the next generation that needs to be prepared. So again, how are you preparing? How are you getting ready for this? This is probably the first time where it's not about growing and thriving and building. This is when it's going to be about preserving and protecting. That single-handedly is a trait and a skill that not many people know how to do, which is why I take a lot of pride in this channel, because that's what I'm teaching you. How to do what so many other wealthy families have done, and that is not how to get rich quick. That is not how to drive the Lamborghini and have the fancy things. It is about preserving and protecting and understanding how building wealth is a long-term thing. It's a marathon, and that's the hard part. This video and all the other ones I do are vital to your preparation for what's coming. The door is right there in front of you. It's your choice. You can either go through it, or you can just stay right where you're at. And just know, if you do nothing, nothing will change, but everything will change for the next generation. So, if you haven't already, well, please subscribe to this channel. Like this video, and also right above, smash that alerts button so you're notified every time I put a new video up. This information's too important for you to ignore. And if you want to learn the first step to protecting your children's futures, check this video out, because it'll teach you all about how to protect and get your kids ready for what's about to happen. See you next time.